Om Shri Sai Ram. Dear students, today's topic is a poem, Ballad of the Tempest by James T. Fields. Now let's see what is the meaning of ballad. Ballad is a story in the form of a poem. Ballad is a story or a narrative in the form of a poem. Tempest is a violent storm. Now this poem has the theme of faith in God. It tells us why faith in God is very important in our lives. Now let's see what faith is. I have a beautiful quote here. Faith moves mountains. Now faith is total confidence. It is a trust which we have in something. Usually when we talk of faith in God. Now can we move mountains? We cannot. Mountains are very strong, very sturdy. Nobody can move mountains. But why do we say faith moves mountains? It means that if you have faith, even the impossible can be made possible. It is impossible to move mountains. But here it says faith moves mountains. It means that even if something is totally impossible, if you have full confidence, if you have full trust or faith, then you can make the impossible possible. I put a beautiful quote on the screen for you. Faith makes all things possible. Hope makes all things work. Love makes all things beautiful. So if you have a combination of these three, we can make our life very beautiful. The poem, Ballad of the Tempest by James T. Fields. Now this is a story in the form of a poem about how a ship gets caught in a storm, in a violent storm. Before we go on to the poem, let's see a little bit about the poet. Now he was born more than 200 years back in 1817. James T. Fields was born on December 31st, end of the year, in 1817 in New Hampshire, USA. He was a publisher, essayist, and a poet. A number of his works were collected in his book Ballads and Verses and published in 1880. This volume contains the poem Ballad of the Tempest. So this poem is found in that volume. He passed away on April 24th, 1881 in Boston, USA at the age of 63. Now let's look at the first stanza of the poem. Remember, each verse we call it as a stanza. In prose, we call it as a paragraph. In poetry, we call it as a stanza. So the first stanza, we were crowded in the cabin, not a soul would dare to sleep. It was midnight on the waters, and a storm was on the deep. I'll read it again. We were crowded in the cabin, not a soul would dare to sleep. It was midnight on the waters, and a storm was on the deep. Now, before we go on to the explanation of the poem, I want you to see the rhyme scheme. Look at the first line, the last word of the first line, cabin. Next word, sleep. Third word, waters. Fourth word, deep. Now, cabin, does it rhyme with sleep? No. Does it rhyme with waters? No. Does it rhyme with deep? No. Second word, sleep. It doesn't rhyme with water, it rhymes with deep. So, the rhyme scheme is the last word of each line of the stanza is given an alphabet. So, cabin would be A. Sleep, it doesn't rhyme with cabin, so it is called B. Waters, it doesn't rhyme with any of those two, it is called C. Deep rhymes with sleep, so it would be called B. So the rhyme scheme would be A, B, C, B. That is called the rhyme scheme. So in the entire poem, you will see that the second and the fourth lines rhyme. By rhyme we mean the last word rhymes. So sleep rhymes with deep. Now let's look at the meaning of the poem. I have given you the glossary on the side here and the picture which depicts a ship caught in the storm. We were crowded in the cabin. Now what is a cabin? Cabin is a private room on a ship. Now the top part of the ship is called the deck, and then when you go to sleep or rest or do other things, you go down and you have small rooms. Those are called cabins. You can have any number of cabins in a ship. Not a soul would dare to sleep. Soul is not a person. This way of speaking, this figure of speech is called a synecdoche. That is, instead of saying a person, you call him a soul. That manner of speaking is called figure of speech, which is in this case a synecdoche. We'll come to that later. It was midnight on the waters. That means it was late in the night, midnight, and it was very dark. Why was it dark? You couldn't even see the stars or the moon because of the clouds. It was a stormy night. The clouds, the black clouds were everywhere. And remember, this is the olden times. They did not have electricity or anything. They could not light a lamp because of the wind and the movement of the ship. So it was pitch dark. It was midnight on the waters and the storm was on the deep. That means a strong storm was in that area. So let's look at the meaning, which I've simplified for you. I've gone from down to up. A ship was caught in a violent winter storm. It was a dark night. The sailors were too frightened to sleep. They were crowded together in a cabin. I hope it is very clear. So how does the story start? It starts with a ship which is caught in a violent storm. The sailors were very scared. They were frightened and they crowded together in the cabin, in one of the rooms, because of the fear. And it was very dark. It was stormy. Everyone was very much afraid and they crowded in the cabin. Nobody could sleep because they were afraid. When you are very afraid or scared, you cannot sleep. So that is the first stanza. I hope it's very clear to you all. Let's go on to the second stanza. As you can see, it's a fearful thing in winter to be shattered by the blast and to hear the rattling trumpet thunder cut away the mast. So here again, the rhyming scheme, the second line, the last word rhymes with the last word of the fourth line, blast, mast. Same scheme in the entire poem. It's a fearful thing in winter to be shattered by the blast and hear the rattling trumpet thunder cut away the mast. Here, when two words in the poem, 2 or 3, have the same beginning word, that is called alliteration. For example, that's another figure of speech. Trumpet thunder, that is an alliteration. Both the words start with the letter T. That figure of speech is called alliteration. This is just for your information. Now let's look at the meaning. Shattered means broken. Blast is a very strong wind. Rattling trumpet thunder, that means the captain or somebody else in the ship, the person in charge, has made an announcement to cut away the mast. What is the mast? I'll show you the mast in the previous picture. You see that big long pole here? That is the mast. So the sails are tied to the mast. So what happens when you cut away the mast? If the sails are there, the ship moves with the wind. The wind blows on the sails and the ship moves. Because the ship was moving too much in the storm, the order was to cut away the mast, to cut it, to chop it off. So it's a fearful thing in winter to be shattered by the blast and to hear the rattling trumpet thunder cut away the mast. So the order has come, cut away the mast, and everyone is suffering there because it is winter, it's very cold. If they were to fall into the water, not only would they die because of the sea, they would die because of the cold, because it would be bitterly cold in winter. So let's look at the meaning. The sailors feared that their ship would break apart in the violent winter storm. Break apart, shatter means break into pieces. For example, you drop a cup on a metal floor, immediately it will become pieces. If you cut into two, that is not shattering. Shattering means making into pieces or breaking into pieces. So the sailors feared that the ship would break apart in the violent winter storm. They heard the order to cut away the mast, which terrified them even more. They were totally scared and afraid that they are going to die very soon. I hope it is clear to you all. The next one. So we shuddered there in silence, for the stoutest held his breath, while the hungry sea was roaring and the breakers talked with death. Here again, breath, death, rhyming words. Let me read it again. So we shuddered there in silence, for the stoutest held his breath, while the hungry sea was roaring and the breakers talked with death. So the meaning is, they were silent and shook in fear. Shudder is shake, shook in fear. Even the bravest, here stoutest means bravest. Usually stout means somebody fat, but in this poem, stoutest means bravest. Even the bravest was frightened. It seemed like the huge noisy waves would destroy them. They were so certain that they were all going to die. The next stanza. And thus we sat in darkness, each one busy with his prayers. We are lost, the captain shouted as he staggered down the stairs. Let me read it again. Here the rhyming words, prayers and stairs. As thus we sat in darkness, each one busy with his prayers. We are lost, the captain shouted as he staggered down the stairs. Staggered means come unsteadily. Usually when a person is drunk, he staggers, right? He doesn't move straight, he moves in an angle. That is called staggering. So while the sailors were in the dark cabin praying, when you are very scared, what do? You don't know what else to do, you start praying. So the sailors were in the dark cabin praying. The captain came down unsteadily. Another reason for being unsteady is it is very dark. So he has to feel his way down the stairs. So that's another reason he might have been unsteady. And shouted in desperation. He was so desperate. Desperate means he had no hope that they are going to make it. That they were lost and nothing could save them. So even when the captain is the person who is supposed to give them courage, he himself has lost hope. And he comes down and says, that's it, we are all lost. Let's see what happens then. But his little daughter whispered, as she took his icy hand, isn't God upon the ocean just the same as on the land? Let me read it again. But his little daughter whispered, as she took his icy hand, isn't God upon the ocean just the same as on the land? There aren't any hard words, so I haven't put up the glossary there. So the little daughter, the captain's little daughter, she took his icy hand. Why was his hand icy? Icy means very cold. Because first of all, it was a winter cold storm. It was very cold. Secondly, he was very frightened. When we are very frightened, our whole body becomes cold, especially the hands. So she took his hand in hers and she said, isn't God upon the ocean just the same as on the land? The God who protects us on land, isn't he going to protect us on the ocean too? Look at the innocence. Look at the faith that little girl had. That is why she was so calm. Everyone else was worried, frightened, praying, really thinking they are going to die. But the little girl, she had so much faith in God. She felt that God protected us on land. Isn't he going to protect us on the ocean too? So she says that to her father. At that time, when even the captain lost hope, his little daughter held his icy hand and quietly whispered whether God wasn't upon the ocean just like he was on the land. Then we kissed the little maiden and we spake in better cheer, and we anchored safe in harbour when the morn was shining clear. Cheer, clear. Rhyming words. Then we kissed the little maiden, and we spake in better cheer, and we anchored safe in harbour when the morn was shining clear. So the words of the little girl filled the sailors with so much confidence. They made them so happy and cheerful that they kissed her out of joy, and they recovered their faith. They got back their faith, and what happened then? All the faith, everything, they are very happy now, and they reached the harbour safely by morning. So her calm faith in God that He would protect them no matter what. Her calm faith in God that He would protect them cheered up the sailors. They kissed the little girl who had instilled hope in them. By morning, the storm had passed. Passed means gone away. And they were able to anchor safely in the harbour. So this is the poem. I thought it was very beautiful. I love it. It gives us so much encouragement that if things are going badly in our lives, which can happen all the time, we always have ups and downs in life. Things are never smooth. So when things are not so good, it is our faith which gives us hope, and we can tide over our problems very easily. That is the important message. I'm sure all of you would have enjoyed the poem very much. Now let's look at the summary. Any summary when you are asked to write, please make sure you write an introductory sentence which would be the who wrote the poem, and then a line about what the message of the poem is, and then the summary. Ballad of the Tempest is a poem written by James T. Fields. This poem gives us the message that faith in God can help us overcome problems in life. Very profound message, which is very useful for all of us. So let me read it again. Ballad of the Tempest is a poem written by James T. Fields. This poem gives us the message that faith in God can help us overcome problems in life. Let's look at the story. See, I've changed it in the next paragraph. A ship was caught in a violent winter storm. The storm was so severe that the sailors feared it would destroy their ship. They could not sleep and crowded in a cabin and prayed silently. Even the bravest among them was frightened. As the storm became worse, even the captain lost hope. At that time, his little daughter held his hand quietly and asked, if God protected them on land, would He not protect them on sea? Her faith in God's protection filled the sailors with hope. By morning, the storm had cleared and they were able to reach the harbour safely. Very easy summary. I haven't put a single hard word for you there. Everything is very straightforward. If you know the story, you should be able to write a summary in your own words. Please do not try to by heart the summary I have given. Write it in your own words. Anything written in your own words carries more value than just copying it from somewhere. The key points. A ship was caught in a violent storm. The sailors were crowded in a cabin in fear. They feared the ship would break apart and they would all die. Even the captain lost hope. At that time, the captain's daughter took her father's hand. She asked, if God protected them on land, would He not protect them at sea? Her words gave hope to the sailors. They reached the harbour safely by morning. That is the story, the key points of the story. Now the figures of speech, some of them I mentioned to you while we were doing the poem. Alliteration, repetition of the same or similar sounds at the beginning of the words here in this poem, trumpet, thunder. So if 2 or 3 words are given which start with the same letter, then it is called alliteration. Now figures of speech make the poem more beautiful. That's why we have them. Synecdoche. Look at the way I pronounce that word. Synecdoche. Synecdoche is a term for a part of something that refers to the whole of something. Here, not a soul would sleep. For example, if a teacher came to the class and he wanted some help, he wanted some students to help, what would he say? He could say, can 2 of you come and help me? That's one way of saying it. Another way is, can I have a pair of hands? That is another way. That is the synecdoche. Can I have a pair of hands? That doesn't mean you should chop off your hands and give it to him. It means pair of hands means, can I have a person to help me? So synecdoche is when a part refers to the whole. It just makes the language more beautiful. Imagery describes experiences by the 5 senses. It creates mental pictures and emotional responses. It creates details in the mind of the reader. So when you read these phrases, you can form an imagine the situation. For example, shuddered in silence. When you read that, you can immediately see in your mind's eye that somebody is shaking in silence. Midnight on the waves. The easy way to say it is, it was a dark night, but it is not attractive. When you say midnight on the waves, it gives you the image that it was a very dark night, nothing could be seen. You can imagine the situation, you can see the situation in your mind's eye. That is what it means by imagery. Captain staggered down the stairs. When you read those words, immediately you can imagine this captain not coming straight but staggering, moving this side and that side and coming down the stairs. So that is imagery, which is very frequently used in poetry. Personification, this we have done several times last year, I'm sure. Giving human characteristics to non-living things. Hungry sea was roaring. Can the sea be hungry? No. So we are giving a human characteristic of hunger to a non-living thing like the sea. Similarly, breakers. Breakers means the waves. Talked with that. Can the waves talk? They cannot. But that way of speaking is called personification, when we give human traits or human characteristics to non-living things. For example, if the leaves are outside going this side and that side, we can say the leaves are dancing. That is personification. Can the leaves dance? No, only human beings dance. But when we say leaves are dancing, that is personification. So all these figures of speech make the language more beautiful, and they are often used in poems. Now, the fun part, comprehension. Read the following extracts and answer the questions. First one, I've given you only extracts. We were crowded in the cabin, not a soul would dare to sleep. A. Who does the word we refer to? B. Not a soul would dare to sleep. Why was it so? C. What does dare mean? Number 2. It's a fearful thing in winter to be shattered by the blast. A. What is referred to as a fearful thing? B. How did it affect the sailors? C. What does shatter mean? Number 3. We are lost, the captain shouted. A. Who does we refer to? B. Why did the captain say this? C. How did his daughter react to the situation? Number 4. Then we kissed the little maiden and we spake in better cheer. Remember, spake is a poetic olden English form of spoke. That's how nowadays, please, you all don't write spake. You have to write S-P-O-K-E. A. Who does we refer to? Who was the little maiden? Why did they kiss her? Last one. But his little daughter whispered as she took his icy hand. Whose daughter was she? B. What did she tell him? C. what was the effect of her words on the sailors? Now, the correct way of answering all these extracts is read the lesson properly, read the meanings, read the short summaries at the end of each stanza, read the whole summary, understand the entire lesson thoroughly, close your textbook, and then answer these questions. If you can answer the extracts by looking at the textbook, might as well not do it. What is the point? So please answer these questions without looking at the poem. That's it for today. Thank you very much, and Sai Ram.